Hello everyone and welcome to Polaron's live stream. As always, we are joined by our director, Eva Hussein, and our guest for this week is Nicholas Marcinkowski, Polaron's Business Development Manager in the Translation Department. Today we'll be talking about miscommunication during COVID-19, the other pandemic. If you are interested in learning more about communications with multicultural audiences, don't forget to visit and subscribe to Polaron's YouTube channel, where we upload videos weekly. Over to you, Eva.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I also wanted to welcome you, although we can't really quite see you, but maybe next week we can, because this is your first live session with us, so welcome. And thank you, Andrea, for mentoring you through the process. So today we're going to talk about the other pandemic. And this is a topic that we are pretty passionate with Nicholas about. And behind the scenes, let me tell you, we do a lot of whinging about what's happening. But firstly, let me welcome Nicholas officially to this, live session.
Hi, how are you going?
What's the other pandemic?
Yeah, it's a strange one. And like you said, it's something that we are very, very passionate about and whinge about a lot. But basically, it's the troubled and uncertain time that we all went through over the last 12 months. It's something that obviously no one was privy to prior, but it's something that shook up a lot of Australia and made us really consider how we communicate and how we actually just get along in our daily lives.
Okay, so
we are very, very.
Yep, sorry, I don't know what that was. So what is the miscommunication pandemic? How would you describe it? Let's say you were a doctor and I come to you and I say, you know what, I'm suffering from really bad miscommunication pandemic. What does that mean?
Look, I think it has been going on for a while, but it's really come to light over the last 12 months. And basically what the miscommunication pandemic is we saw a lot of gaps in communication. We saw a lot of flaws in people's, campaigns to get information out there. I think a lot of organizations really struggled to come to grips with how to communicate in such an unstable environment. With a new topic as well, such as COVID-19, I think there was a lot of misinformation being spread. And this is where it became very, very difficult for the right professionals, such as doctors or community organizations or government organizations to deliver adequate information that would help people through this uncertain time. So I think, yeah, we definitely experienced a lot of issues surrounding that. There were, don't get me wrong, a lot of organizations that did cope well, but I think there were definitely a vast majority of companies and organizations that struggled to communicate during this time.
Okay, so we'll unpack this shortly, but from what you said, what I'm hearing is that there's like two levels or two main issues. One is what the multicultural communities are exposed to in terms of information out there. And it's not just, multicultural communities, everybody, I guess, because we get so much information thrown at us, and how do we know that what's accurate and what we should rely on? But the other side of the coin is, of course, that there are organizations whose job it is to communicate certain issues. And there were some failures, and we're not going to point fingers. I think more to the point, this session will be about what can we do to try and avoid it, or do better. So let's focus on the first thing, which is how multicultural communities or diverse communities acquire information, and where might they reach to get it, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think, the platforms in which our multicultural communities can actually access information is vast and varies depending on the community. I don't think there is a one size fits all for where our multicultural communities can get information. I'll use an anecdotal example, but my grandparents, who are Polish, they are stuck to their Polish television, so their ethnic media, right? But I've got friends from the South Sudanese community who are far less likely to tune into their ethnic media and are more privy to social media, right? So I think the way in which our multicultural communities can actually access this information will vary. So it's important to understand that. the exact medium or platform in which they will attain this information, there's no one size fits all there either.
Nicholas, that was an excellent example, because if you think of your grandparents who are around the age of 80, the way that they communicate is different, and the communication channels and also sources of information are different, because they have their paid Polish TV channel at home. So they might really be more across what's happening in Poland and how Poland deals with the pandemic. And the key health messages are Polish for Poland rather than Australia. So that's number one. But your South Sudanese friends, on the other hand, they're probably computer savvy, they on Instagram or wherever, but they might also be getting inaccurate information from different sources. So what I wanted just to, I guess, underline there of what you said is that you can't, as an organization, sit there and say, okay, I need to communicate with, 50 different communities. I'm going to develop a brochure, put it on my website. Everyone's going to read it and everyone's going to be informed, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what would you advise people that are in that space where, because usually what happens actually, and we know that from experience, is that the job of, either communications officer, diversity officer, bilingual worker is quite imprecise, if I can put it that way. So somebody will be hired by an organization and all of a sudden translation becomes their job as well. Often it's not on their position description, often they've never done it. What would you say to someone who's just started and they like, okay, I've got to translate some things for Victorian communities, let's say? What would be your advice? How should they approach it?
Yeah, look, I think you're spot on there. There are a bunch of scenarios where, clients have reached out to Polaron and asked for help because they've been in that exact same position. They've developed a diversity portfolio and then all of a sudden they've been asked to coordinate an entire project into 50 languages, 1,000 plus words into 3 different resources. And that's daunting as it is, and I get that. But I think what the one message I would give is that there needs to be a comprehensive approach to translations. There needs to be a not systematic and transactional process going on, but more so a very process. They need to be able to reach out to communities as opposed to assuming what needs to be done. Like you said, just translating a brochure, posting it on a website, and then hoping that covers every area. I think that they need to actually delve into the community, reach out to community leaders, reach out to people of knowledge within those cultures, and actually understand what's going to have a meaningful impact. I think that too often we jump the gun in translations and we see it as a transactional process whereby we simply say, we've got to get this out there quick, we've got to get it out there fast, let's translate this brochure and let's get it out there. But if we spend the time in actually speaking to our communities and getting them involved in the process, we'll find out that we're actually going to deliver a lot more reliable information. The information is going to be a lot more culturally appropriate, but more, above everything, we are going to have resources that aren't going to be obsolete. They're not going to be a waste of time or money. They're going to get out there to the community first, and we're not going to have to rejig, reshape, look back in 6 months and go, wow, that was a terrible mistake. We're going to have a resource that actually sits and stands.
Okay. And cast your mind back to about a year ago when we were sort of sitting at home thinking, we are invincible, nothing's going to happen, China virus, Trump, whatever, things were sort of being thrown around. And then come March, we were like, okay, this is really happening. And we were watching how multicultural communications were engaged or not engaged, more to the point, and how different organizations, including governments, were like, okay, we've got to get that information out there, right? So for me, the main thing as I was watching this happening was like, how come there is no plan? How come everything's so ad hoc and last minute? And, I heard the other day that in Victoria alone, there was something like, I can't remember the exact number, but $63 million last year that was spent on translation. And I want to know on what and where and how can we still get from our community leaders that we work with on a daily basis feedback that, you know, we feel isolated, we feel kept out. So what I was going to ask you is innovation, because we know that if you translate 63 languages, put it on your website, that's not going to work for everybody. It might work for some people that are, you know, personally know where to find it and whatever, navigate the internet. So what sort of innovative approaches would you suggest? Again, we're going back to this person, you imagining that you're a doctor and this person says, okay, I've just been hired and I've got to do translation. What sort of innovation can we recommend or suggest to people to reach communities better?
Yeah. So I'll tackle it from two facets. I'll give you the answer first as to what innovative process we can implement. Now, this is so simple and it would not take much effort at all for organizations to realize it, but people need to diversify the platforms and the mediums in which they're using for translations. Translation is no longer a process where we're putting one word into the next. We're translating culture to another culture, okay? Yeah. And that can't be done through a piece of paper anymore. You say it to me all the time, Eva, how often do we read? Not a lot of people read much anymore. People and different demographics need to hear things sometimes. They need to see things sometimes visually. More often than not, it can even be catered to their actual culture to make it more meaningful. What I mean by that is actually getting a community involved in translation before we even touch a single word into another language. Right. So there needs to be a different approach to how we actually get resources and information out there. I think that's not a key innovation. That's not some high AI tech answer you were looking for, but you know what it is? It is simple and it does work. I think if people take that approach to developing their communication for multicultural communities, they'll realize what a difference it makes. And some of the clients that we deal with who have taken that approach and actually have jumped on that boat are really, really seeing the benefits to their communities. They're seeing the health outcomes and the well-being outcomes of these multicultural communities.
Because it's hard to measure, isn't it, Nicholas? So
yes.
The first thing that we touched on is a plan. So many organizations don't necessarily have a plan of how to approach, a crisis situation where people's lives are at stake. And you would think that is built into people's risk management somewhere, but often it isn't. The other thing we said is, look, the old school translation rarely works anymore. So you need to get your thinking hats on and think, okay, at a genuine level, how do I work with these communities? And they're not going to be all the same, as we already outlined. But the third point I think we need to make here is, how do we then ensure that all that money that's been spent, all that work that we have done is of good quality? How would you recommend that the new wave or the new school of translation should be approached?
Yeah. So to tackle that third part that you're talking about here, how can we ensure that the translations we are actually doing, or the communication we are actually creating, is meaningful, it is accurate, it is correct? I think the biggest thing we can do here is employ layers into our process. And what I mean by that is not only ticking off the box for a NADI certified translator, which is still typically what a lot of organizations do.
If we're lucky, that is, yeah. Because a lot of work gets sent overseas, of course, without clients knowing, Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. People do take those shortcuts. I think it's important that we realize the opportunity cost in not taking the shortcut, and we realize what we can actually save in terms of time, money, and quality that we can get out of our services if we do the right thing. And that is by employing the correct NADI certified translators, but actually going that step further, getting internal checkers, external checkers, independent checkers, even employing community representatives, which is something that Polaron actually does. We actually employ community leaders and ethno-specific organizations to review content. What they can do then is they can actually provide culturally appropriate feedback to those translators. And that actually is going to lead to a better quality translation or a better quality resource in the end, because we're not actually missing any of the, the culturally safe terminology that we should be using for a community. And now, Eva, you know more than ever, if we generate a resource that is, not culturally safe, or there's words in there that are a bit, controversial to that community, you may as well throw that resource in the bin, because it's not going to resonate with them.
But Nicholas, that sounds like a lot of work. So I think from a point of view of a client, again, imagine that you're a doctor. I come to you and I say, Nicholas, I've got this and that, and you go like, yeah, we're going to have to do this and this and that. Why would you do it? So you've already spoken about the quality aspect of it, where you need to be sure that the information that gets out there into the community is actually able to be understood even. So for the reasons that you've just mentioned, but like, I'm not going to mention who, but like recently I've seen some COVID vaccination information rolled out, where in the Polish language they used, in English it said COVID vaccination. Into Polish on the same page it was translated in two different ways. One was vaccination for COVID, and one was vaccination against COVID. And you think, okay, well, in English that's the same thing. That means the same thing, right? But if you don't, so clearly that wasn't even checked by a second person, because that's the first thing you would pick up if you even a bilingual speaker or whoever. So that's gone out to the community unchecked, and that kind of one word issue can create a lot of confusion, right? Mm-hmm. So in terms of maximizing the reach, could you give us some tips on, I want to pick on one particular, sector of the multicultural community, and that is the African communities. We know that they're very, very diverse. Some of language groups are very small, so you're never going to get a translation into Burundi or one of those languages. What would you suggest organizations do to cater for people that speak, the languages they speak are very small or emerging or are quite new to Australia, where there may not be a translator that's certified in that language?
Yeah, definitely. Look, there are two angles I would take this from. The first being from the actual generation of resources type of angle. I think we need to remember with these rare and emerging languages, we can't, and I'll say it again and again, we need to take into consideration their literacy levels. This is something here in Australia that not a lot of organisations are up to scratch with, but these rare and emerging languages, more often than not, literacy levels are very, very low, even in their own language. So we need to be able to generate content in a manner that suits them, and whether that's by voiceover, or audio files, we need to start looking at the way we tackle those rare and emerging languages with literacy levels. Secondly, and it's similar to what I've said with the community outreach, if we reach out to these communities, because there are, although the numbers are quite low for these languages or these cultures, there are community organisations that exist. If not one, there'll be plenty. If you, as an organisation, reach out to that community organisation and ask for assistance and tell them what you're trying to achieve, 99.9% of the time, that organisation is willing to help. And they will help you develop a resource. They will help you reach out to those communities. They will tell you the areas in which those communities most likely reside. There is plenty of assistance we can get just by reaching out to our community organisations for those rare and emerging languages. And I think that's one of the key points, Eva.
Right. Thank you, Nicholas. And the other point, of course, is that you can use a language such as French or Arabic or even Portuguese to cater to some of those communities. So for a lot of them, it's a second or third or even fourth language.
Yeah.
If you don't have the resources or ability to translate into those tiny languages, where sometimes there's maybe 500 people in the entire state, you could use other languages to maximize your reach and expand your resources. And sometimes you might think, why would we be translating French or Portuguese? But that's why, so that more people can read it, right? So there are lots of ideas like that, that anyone that'll come to you, or Agatha or Iris or Marta will hear about. What about some other tips for translation, or if you've never done translations, what else would you suggest people do?
So this is also a very simple but very effective method, and I think you spoke about it briefly earlier in this live session. But we mentioned having a plan, and I think COVID-19 really brought out some systematic errors in the translation industry, and I think we kind of realized from what was happening during this uncertain time, and with resources being put out there, in a chaotic manner, we saw that translation was an afterthought. It always has been, I think, and I think that in this pandemic, it was highlighted significantly.
Right.
Having a plan in place for your multicultural approach is so simple, but definitely necessary. I know that budgets are tight and people need to spend it on specific things, but if you allocate even a small portion of your budget every year to something that may go wrong and may be required for the multicultural community, you will be 10 times better off than any other organization who doesn't do that.
Right.
That plan in place, having a bit of a budget set aside for multicultural communities is going to allow you to be a lot more reactive. What we saw is a lot of information becoming obsolete
very quickly.
In the pandemic very, very quickly. And I think that happens for a number of reasons, but one of those reasons is because we're unprepared and we don't get that information out there quick enough. If we've got that preparation in place, we've got that plan in place, we've got the funds in place, we'll be much better off when the time comes for those multicultural communities.
And I think one of the things I wanted to also emphasize, and I'm sure you agree, is that you don't need to translate your entire website, your vision and mission statements, your fancy brochures. People, particularly in a time of crisis or where information needs to be sent and received fast and accurately, should really focus on smaller chunks of information that are sort of to the point and focus on what people need to know there and then. And so when you think about translation as an organization, it doesn't mean that it's going to be months and months of work. It can be quite targeted and focused and to the point, right?
Yeah, I think that's a massive misconception. I think a lot of the time our prospectual clients will look at their website, or they'll look at all of the resources they have. They come to us and they ask to have it all translated. We give them the actual cost of what something like that takes, and they immediately get scared, or they immediately get shocked in their boots, and that's a real off-putting thing for a lot of people and organizations. But I think it is important to remember that specific information and targeted information translated well is better than having a million words translated at an adequate level.
Right.
If we look at the resources that are actually important and relevant to our communities at the time, and translate those well with community input, with maybe even co-designing those resources, getting those multiple layers of checking in, we're going to have a much better, firing line of information than if we were to gather all of the resources we could and just translate them overseas in the quickest way possible and just getting as much information out there. They're two very different approaches, but one supersedes the other in terms of quality and actual output.
Right, and also outcomes for real people. So I always refer, to real people that read this information, and they might understand or they might not. They might act or they might not, but their actions based on the information they receive can have dire consequences sometimes. So I think in a crisis situation, in a pandemic, that information needs to get there fast, but not at the risk of having it mistranslated or not being targeted in the right way. Nicholas, we've got 6 minutes to go, and I'm going to hand over to her. Sarah, that was really, really interesting, and I really like how you explain and chunk the information so that even I can follow. But no, it's been excellent. Hazara, I was going to ask you if we have any questions.
Yes, we do have some questions here. I think you briefly touched on this before, but there's one specific question about the piece of content needed to be translated. How do you choose which specific languages to translate, especially when there's a tight budget? It can be such a daunting task for smaller companies.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Eva did touch on this briefly, and it's exactly what we spoke about. You know, there are, you know, hundreds of languages that we can look to translate into here in Australia, but sometimes it is as simple as recognizing those category of languages. I think we had a live session last week where Dominic spoke about those tier of languages, and some of those languages do cover a vast majority of the population, like Arabic, like French, like Portuguese, like Spanish. A lot of those languages are able to cater for a vast majority of communities out there. So something as simple as that can work. I think as well, what I've just mentioned a couple of minutes ago is targeted information more than anything. You can translate 150 words into 50 languages for a small price. And if that information is targeted, it's going to be very, very meaningful to your community. As opposed to looking at that, you know, 50-page booklet and trying to translate it into as many languages. Let's look at targeted information. Let's look at relevant information.
Right. All very, very good points. But really, essentially, what the communities want is know what, how, where, how much, you know, things like, you know, so especially if you don't have a lot of information in other languages, that would be the first point. You know, develop a very simple, let's say, a fact sheet that doesn't require desktop publishing or fancy images, but just, you know, when it's written in English very precisely and bearing in mind at a genuine level that this is going to be translated and this is going to be used by real people out there. We're not going to be just putting it up on our wall. That is the approach that we advocate people take, where, you know, it doesn't have to cost a lot, it doesn't have to take a long time, but smaller steps rather than, you know, feeling overwhelmed with the task at hand. Okay, Hazara, what other questions do we have, please?
Yeah, we have one more question here. Does Polaron provide any sort of assistance in terms of managing budgets when it comes to translation projects?
Well, what a great question, Nicholas. Do we ever?
Yes, that's something that Polaron's more than happy to assist companies and organizations with. We can even sit down and develop year-long, 2-year-long, 3-year-long, 4-year-long plans to manage your multicultural communications. So we can look at what budget you may have allocated or are looking at having allocated. We can then take that and put that into an actual working strategic plan so that we are not being ad hoc and that we are not being reactive to these processes, but as opposed to getting to it when it comes, we're ready for it, we're proactive, and we've got a plan in place. So most certainly, and if you do, you reach out, you get in touch with anyone here, myself included, and we'll be happy to talk it over with you guys.
Thank you, Nicholas. So I think the main takeaway from this session is that what was it? Failing to plan is planning to fail, essentially.
That's it.
So we would encourage people strongly to, whether it's in your own team, on your own, with us, with you know, whoever, with communities, just to sit down and think about, okay, what is our obligation as an organization to communicate our information? What communities are priorities? So don't just go for top 10 or top 20, because there are communities that never get anything translated. How can we maximize the budget? How can we be sure that the information we translating is accurate? And how do we disseminate it to the community so that, you know, by taking those little steps, everybody's just a little bit more informed, we all are a little bit more prepared, and it's less of a stressful process where, you know, everything's a little bit more predictable, because times aren't, that's for sure. Hazara, you've done a great job today. Thank you for the introduction and managing the session. Well done. Thank you, Andrea, for your support behind the scenes there. But most of all, thank you, Nicholas. I really, you know, I work with you day in and day out, but I really enjoyed how you explained information and the ease that you have in also in chunking it, so it's not too much and it's not too overwhelming. So I'm going to hand over to you for the last few words, and then we're done.
Yeah, no, look, I'm very much on the same page with a lot of things here. I feel like yourself and I can talk about this topic for hours, which is not
we're not going to do that. No,
we're not going to do that here. We've kept it short, but yeah, I think everything you've mentioned there is great. It's a good summary of what we need to do. Planning ahead is key here, and I think we just need to remember who our end communities are, who our end users are, and take that into account when we are planning. Yep.
Fantastic last words. Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Andrea, and everyone that's watched. I can see that we've not been able to answer all the questions, so feel free to reach out and talk to us further. So thank you, everyone, and have a great